Good evening and welcome. I'm Sheila Balgobin and I am the Dream Decipherer, and I help you to crack the code of your sleep and dreams so you can sleep sound and dream deep. This evening's dream has our dreamer up in the clouds and hanging out naked on the beach. So let's find out what's going on. The dreamer reports that they were on a beach and floated up into the sky. And before they realized it, they were above the clouds and realized that in order to get back down to the ground, they had to make themselves feel heavy. So they had to visualize being heavy in their body so that they could float back down. When the dreamer got back down to the beach, they realized that they were naked and therefore had to cover themselves up. And the dream ends there. And please forgive me if you hear an occasional sniffle. Um, I was in having lunch with a friend today, and going into central London, the fumes from the buses and things just really wreaks havoc with my sinuses. Anyway, let's break this down and find out what was going on, why this person was above the clouds, and why they were ended up naked on the beach. We'll start with the beach. Most people associate beaches with relaxation, enjoyment, peace. And it's been uh, proven that the spray from the ocean produces endorphins or feel good hormones within us. I know when I lived in LA, that was like my drug of choice, going to the beach, because I didn't live far from it. But they also, you could look at this dreamer standing at the edge of the ocean or by the ocean, um, to as a metaphor for the being at the almost at the level of the unconscious, because the unconscious is likened to an ocean compared to the little cork that's the conscious mind, the part that goes I, floating on this ocean of unconsciousness. Now, my question here, excuse me, for the dreamer is there a need for the dreamer to feel some kind of peace or relaxation somewhere in their lives? Now, going from there, where the dreamer ends up floating up into the sky above the clouds, one thing that came to me is that quite often as children, we dream about being able to fly. And to me, that kind of expresses a lightness of being and the ability to literally go wherever we choose to go or desire to go. And that brought up the question for me of, does this dreamer feel the need to kind of lighten up and float away from some part of their life, to fly away from it? Um, the other thing that came up for me is on the psychological level, when somebody is in the clouds, it can signify what's called inflation, where the ego is off on some lofty ego-driven trip and is not really seeing things clearly. They're seeing it from a very kind of tunnel vision and almost selfish point of view. And it gives them these inflated ideas about themselves or others or situations. And I would ask here is, could the dreamer be in his head or ego about something? As a possibility there. The other question I had was, is there a need for the dreamer to be able to clear their mind of cloudy thinking, or perhaps become clear about something that's on their mind and seeing it from a higher, i.e., up in the clouds, above the clouds, perspective? Then we come to where the dreamer had to feel heavy or imagine themselves as feeling heavy in order to be able to come back down to earth. And my question here was, do some kind of heavy thinking or heavy thoughts bring the dreamer back down to earth? And how does that feel? Are these pleasant thoughts, perhaps, or unpleasant thoughts that are bringing them back down to earth, maybe even with a bump? Um, and the other thing is that there's a implication of being grounded, literally grounded to the earth. And I wonder here if there's a need for the dreamer to be more grounded in some way. They're up in their heads, up in the clouds, and need to come back down to earth. Then we get being naked on the beach. And I always think whenever dreamers talk about nakedness, I something from my university days, there was a thing about go naked and party. So that came to mind. But once the dreamer had actually come back down from above the clouds to earth, the dreamer realized that they were naked and had to cover themselves up. Now, you could look at nakedness in the literal sense, not having any clothes on, but it can also be an implication of honesty, truthfulness, and being one's true self. In other words, being emotionally naked. And in this, the dreamer's desire to cover up this nakedness makes me want to ask, why did the dreamer feel the need to cover up? If we're looking at it from a psychological point of view, why does the dreamer feel the need to cover themselves up? On a more mundane level, I said, well, it seems that this dreamer was on the beach by themselves, but maybe they weren't. Were there other people on the beach? And it wasn't a nudist beach, so he felt the need to cover up. What was going on there? Was there anyone around? But going back to the more psychological level, it's like, is being naked, emotionally naked, in some way doesn't feel safe for the dreamer, and so they feel the need that they have to cover up. And how does the dreamer feel about that? And not being able to truly be themselves, be their honest selves, but they have to cover up. So is there guilt involved, or fear involved, or something else? What's going on? Why can't they just be their naked self? So this generated a whole spate of questions, and which I'll share. And I would like the dreamer to hopefully afterwards explain to me that after the dreamer received clarity, or in the blue sky thinking, because remember, he went above the clouds to the clear blue sky. So did this blue sky thinking cause the dreamer to feel that they needed to cover up whatever they learned or felt when they had this experience above the clouds? Now, does being naked, and again, looking at it from an emotional level, before others upset or disturb the dreamer in some way? And why is that? And how is that a disturbance? There's an implication here that the dreamer may need to get out of their head and come down to earth, and be more embodied in some way, especially these days, because we're online so much. We become talking heads. We're in our heads all the time. And I know that working with clients, I often have to get them to get back in touch with their bodies, to literally earth themselves and ground themselves again. And I wonder if this may be the case here, that the dreamer is up in their heads, in the clouds a lot, and needs to come back down into their body and be more embodied and more present in their life. And there's also the question of the dreamer's thought processes here. Is the dreamer's thinking clouded or cloudy in some way with various ideas and thoughts and opinions, which are somehow not in sync with their everyday life or everyday reality, so that there's this kind of pie in the sky, pie in the sky kind of thinking, which is a little bit out of touch with reality or what other people expect, perhaps. And that also begged the question, how can the dreamer reconcile this ascent from at this higher level, perhaps gaining some kind of enlightenment, with the reality of his or her lower self or earthly reality, everyday reality? And I would suggest here that perhaps the dreamer is processing certain thoughts or feelings or behaviors and trying to make sense of it, by ascending to a higher level of thinking, a higher perspective, and then coming back down into everyday reality. But there still seems to be some kind of disconnect between the two. And I wonder whether the dreamer is trying to reconcile this higher level of thinking or different level of thinking from their ordinary, day-to-day life. So there you have it. Lots of questions for the dreamer, and I'll be intrigued to find out later what the dreamer makes of all of this. But maybe he needs to go naked and party on the beach. Who knows? But there you have it. Blue skies, clouds, and being naked on the beach, whether that's a physical nakedness or an emotional one. And thanks so much for watching and listening. And if you have a dream that you'd really like to get some tips on, you can always contact me at the web address there and book an appointment. And in a short consultation, I'll give you some tips to be able to orient you in how to look at your dream and get the meaning behind the goal, get the gold in the gobbledygook of your dreams. Have a great evening and rest of the week, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.